Welcome to the first episode and installment of Off the Glass. I'm your host, Cairo. And before the NBA draft comes up and before the NBA season officially ends, I really wanted to get this video out because I feel as though I've been seeing a lot in the media that this word generational comes up so much. And it's especially labeled to highly touted prospects, of course, players who are very popular in high school and tend to be very popular and do well in college. And if I'm being honest, I don't really like this generational talent, this definition that we have for it, as NBA media likes to display it, because the bar keeps getting moved. And today I really want to discuss ideas around, my personal opinion around Cooper Flag. I think we need to be able to separate this ideal around being a generational prospect versus a generational player and overall player comparisons. So, to get started, I Cooper Flag is my number one player for sure. I think he has the highest floor. I want to say the highest ceiling, and I think that's more of a factor of his game itself and how he operates. I think him coming out of college, he's of course, I think the youngest player in this NBA draft. I think it's him and then Noah Asenge, and I think what Cooper brings to the team is a connector piece. I think this isn't really a hot take. I just don't personally see Cooper Flag as a number one option. Now, could he develop into it? That's a different scenario. But Cooper Flag, in my eyes, I've had the lucky opportunity to watch almost every game he's played, and he's someone that I see as raising his teammates' floor. He is somebody that is a connector piece that is able to get everybody involved. He is truly a Swiss Army knife, and I see him play and his reads that he can make, not just with playmaking, but on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's up there, and it's not really common to see a player this young to have that type of pedigree. And I think that is something to, of course, watch out for. But I truly do see someone who is a number two, number three option type of player in the NBA. Now, does that mean I think he's bad? Or do I think he's not going to be a Hall of Famer one day? No. For sure, I think he has the type of potential, but I feel as though he does struggle a lot with his shot diversification. And I think that's a big thing when you have a Hall of Fame talent and when you have someone who is a number one option type of player. If I'm being honest, I've seen a lot of NBA media discuss Cooper Flag, and they have him compared a lot to Scottie Pippen, Kawhi Leonard. I've seen Jason Tatum, Andre Karolinko. And while I do think a lot of those are very valid and I can see the hints of these players, I wanted to say that like my personal player comparison, like just player comparison, is Pascal Siakam. I truly do think Cooper is a more polished version of Pascal Siakam and a more he's definitely has a higher IQ, especially being 18 years old. And before I get into that, I just wanted to say that it's not a matter of when a player is being compared. I think we as fans have also another issue with having a player comparison and automatically thinking he's going to be exactly like that player. I think Cooper Flag, obviously, I think he has the potential to be a lot better than Pascal Siakam. But, for example, Clay Thompson, I think, was compared to Marco Bellinelli. I don't think, like, in terms of the shooting aspect, maybe it was a lazy comparison, but it's more of when I'm comparing Cooper Flag to Siakam, it's the type of play style, it's how they operate in the game. I'd say they're very similar. And we can compare it to watching the NBA Finals right now. The way that Siakam gets his shots, the way that he can run the floor, he's a great rim runner. He can shoot the ball. He's lights out. He gets to the rim very easily. He plays good defense. He's essentially a Swiss Army knife as well. And I think what Cooper has over Siakam is, and this is why I believe he's a more polished version of Siakam, is that what Cooper brings to the table is a little bit more dynamic. What Cooper brings is that offensive playmaking where he can find his open teammates. He led Duke in almost, I think, every statistical category, and he has a way to be a knack on defense where I think he is a lot better defender than Siakam. And don't get me wrong, Siakam's played really well defensively, but I think Cooper Flag is just more in tune with his game right now, compared to obviously Siakam. And when I look at Siakam, it's not a knock in terms of like thinking that Cooper Flag can't be a number one option, but seeing how Siakam plays his role, especially with a dominant first point guard like Halliburton, it's really helped Siakam develop his game even more. And I think that's honestly that would be a perfect situation for Cooper because the reason why I don't see him being a number one option, or at least consistently being a number one option, is because I look at the games, especially the games that Duke lost, and I don't see the consistency with his shot diversification and his shot diversity, right? So when you look at a lot of the number one options in the league, you look at SGA, you look at the KDs, even the James Harden in his prime, the Kawhi Leonards, a lot of these players, they have that type of pedigree where they can hit shots from anywhere on the floor. They can get open at any time. They can create that type of separation. And we've seen it time and time again. These Hall of Fame players hits these type of shots. But in the games where Cooper Flag has moments to hit these type of shots and to get different types of looks, he tends to struggle. And he tends to not put the ball in the right positions at times. And that's not exactly the biggest knock because I would say when I'm looking at, arguably the best players in the league right now, Giannis and Jokic, they really aren't number one options. Now, can they hit shots that are, last second shots here and there? Yes, they've done it plenty of times. And but I think what makes them even better is their, like I said, their ability to raise floors and how they can get to the final shot, especially when they're down. I think one of the biggest examples that I could say personally with Cooper Flag is that I've seen is that I want to compare later games, especially this one example game is Duke versus Clemson. And Duke lost 71-73, and I'm looking at my notes right now. Flag shoots 6 of 17. And Flag has struggled most of this game, and he's clearly being swarmed by the Clemson defense, and he struggles multiple times. And he has struggled multiple times, not only in this game, but throughout the year. And in this game, he hit nearly 4 shots in a row. And that added on with elite defense and free throws coming up, he has a knack of being able to get his team to the final shot, to bring his team there. He can hit multiple shots in a row. He can get to the right basket. He can make the right reads. But when it comes to the actual final shot, he struggles. And I think this is something to note. Because while I still do think Cooper Flag is the number one option, do I think he's a number one? Sorry, what did I just say? He's the number one player in the class, but do I think he's the number one option? Not exactly, because it's happened multiple times a year. And especially in this Clemson game, he turned the ball over and he slipped. Now, granted, is it really his fault? No, like the floor was slippery and he literally slipped last second. And I don't really like to use examples earlier in the season just because I think with Duke, one thing I've noticed, there was a video that I watched around Cooper Flag, and it's his ability to be a very quick learner. And when you watch Cooper Flag in high school, he struggled a lot with shooting. Like, especially being able to just catch and shoot or be a still shooter. He tended to move a lot. And I think that was one of his biggest issues where in high school there were times where people have left him wide open. Many times where teams just left him wide open because he couldn't find a clear-cut shot and his form wasn't really there. And I think even in the beginning of the season, right, when when he played against Maine in the first matchup, when he went against, I think, Kansas or Kentucky, I forgot. I don't know if they played. But I just know he tended to struggle, especially against not top teams, and the internet went absolutely ballistic, which I thought was crazy, especially because he's getting adjusted. He's still, I think him being 18 and reclassing is a very fine, like, I wouldn't say excuse, but it's a good thing to note because he should be at prom right now. And the internet went absolutely ballistic when he started to struggle and he couldn't really find the right shots. But as the year progressed and he got to his he got comfortable, the offense was fluid and he found his way. And it was very easy for him. His 3 point percentage, that was one of his biggest knocks because he tended to struggle, and he absolutely his 3 point percentage shot up like an insane amount, and he was able to hit a lot of wide open shots, a lot of movement shots, and it became a lot easier for him. And I think that's why in the NBA, I think him adjusting might take time, but he's a very quick learner, and I love that for him. The thing is, comparing his later games, I don't like I said, I don't want to use his previous earlier games because he was still adjusting to the game, and clearly there's a different mark because he's gotten so much better towards the end of the season. That Clemson game, he slipped, he fell, he turned the ball over, and a lot of the times, multiple times in the clutch. I don't know if it was against Kansas or Arizona, but he turned the ball over. He struggled a lot to get that final shot, and he tends to have one type of shot, and it's that fading mid range, whether that be in the post up or in the free throw line, 15 feet out. It's his typical shot, and I get it. You know, Kawhi Leonard has that type of shot as well, where you want a player that has a go to spot and has a go to way that you always hit it. Kevin Durant has the same thing, but his ball handling, I will say, is an issue. And when I look at number one options in the league, I look at players that can get any type of shots that they want and that can either get to the rim, get to the mid range. They're three level threats. They can score from anywhere on the floor, and I don't think that's Cooper Flag. Now, could you say he could become that? It's very possible. It's very possible. I think him being a quick learner, as I mentioned before, it adds to his pedigree. And another example game that I have in my notes is, of course, Houston, his final shot. In this game, he and like others, he dominated. He played pretty well, but throughout multiple games, especially in the clutch, he can get his team to the final shot. He can elevate his team, but when it comes to the final shot, he struggles. As you can see, him backing down in the post, him trying to get to a shot instead of finding either the right play or getting to a different type of shot that could get him open, creating more separation. He couldn't really do that. And he hasn't really done that a lot all year. Has he shown flashes? Yes, of course. But him being able to hit different type of shots is a very big thing. And, he usually makes consistent reads, and, he's like I said, he's a very quick learner, and I think him being a Maverick. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes, but him being a Maverick will definitely help with that, especially with the veteran presence there. But his season at Duke, like I said, this is no knock to Cooper Flag in terms of what he can be. But when I look at Cooper Flag, I see somebody that isn't a number one option. Now, a lot of people love to bring up, oh, what about his time with Team USA? How did he do against that? They loved him out there, and LeBron loved him. Well, LeBron loved Shabazz Napier too, and look how that turned out. Listen, that's an over exaggeration, but Cooper Flag is a good player. He's very good, and him doing well against Team USA even adds more to his resume. I just don't see what he's done at Duke, and I don't see that really translating in terms of him taking the final shot. Now, I know I'm repeating myself, but like I said, that doesn't mean I don't think he can. I think he can potentially be that type of player where he can bring his team to the final shot. But I really I don't see him being a number one option in the NBA. And my player comparison is a Pascal Siakam, more polished version. That's my take on Cooper Flag. And before I, get into other logistics, I really wanted to go in depth about his fit with the Mavericks just a little bit, and then overall this idea about being a generational prospect versus a player. I think, as mentioned before, I think his fit with the Mavericks is almost very seamless. I think when I look at the Mavericks roster, yeah, they have a lot of question marks, especially with injuries going on. They lost half of their roster towards the end of the season. They had like nobody on the bench. But I think learning behind Anthony Davis and even Klay Thompson and Kyrie, those guys are championship players. They know how to win. One of the biggest knocks to a lot of young players, especially after they, get into the league, they establish themselves more, is that because young players are drafted in the lottery and they're usually drafted to teams that aren't good, they don't know how to win, and they tend to become more selfish, and they tend to lose that winning mentality. And I think players, I think Amon Shumpert said that in his podcast, or one of the tanking Sixers players said that in his podcast. But I think him learning behind those type of players, and especially because I think he also just recently had his workout and they loved him. I think he fits really well with that team. Now, do I think he's gonna start? Depends if they trade PJ Washington. I don't think he'll, unless he shows out an insane amount. I think realistically they're probably just gonna start PJ Washington first, and then Cooper Flag's gonna start. Because usually top picks, that's just how it works. I mean, I think Zachary Ricochet started off the bench like to start the season, but I think his fit, based on my notes, it's seamless. Not to mention, it's more of a shift from a such an offensive loaded firepower to now a defensive scheme focus. You lose Luka Doncic and you lose Kyrie. There's more of a load on Anthony Davis and Klay Thompson to pick up that load. But those are guys that are entering towards the latter half of their careers, so they're gonna also have an emphasis of giving the ball and contributing and making sure Cooper Flag gets what he wants. And I think I love that for him because it embraces who he is as a player. I think if he went to like Utah or like Washington, yeah, he could have. I think he would have been great, and I think he would have done well as well. I think does well in any system, but I think it's the specific focus on the defensive scheme, and him having veteran, experienced championship caliber players on his team to help him. It means a lot, because I'm telling you right now, that mentality and the mental spot, especially what Kobe said about the mentality, is very important to NBA players. You have to get through the grind, and I think him being a Maverick, unless Nico trades him, because that'd be crazy. I think it's a seamless fit, and I think I love what the Mavericks are doing so far. In terms of like being able to implement him, I think they're gonna put him in immediately and have him run with AD. Have AD be the power forward, which is his natural position, and then Cooper Flag. I'm pretty sure Cooper played power forward in college, so it will be an adjustment because he will be most likely on the perimeter if AD is on the four, unless they switch that out and then have AD start at the five. But I do think it will be an adjustment. Him being a Maverick, if I'm making any prediction right now, I think at the end of the day, it depends if the Mavericks are good or not. If they don't have any injuries, if they're fully healthy and Clay is average at least, Anthony Davis is okay, and then you could argue Cooper is the third or second option behind Anthony Davis or Clay. I think you could argue that he 14 to 17 points per game in his first NBA season. I don't think that's illogical to say, but I think that's very fair. I think 14 to 17 points. He grabs maybe 6 to 7 rebounds, and he passes. I think his playmaking will be the most underrated aspect of this. I think him, if he's at that fourth spot, him fitting with Klay Thompson and then Matt Christie, and then I think Jaden Hardy will play. It makes it a lot easier for him to find open looks for guys because he's already good at that. So I like that for Cooper Flag. I think it works well. I think him being a quick learner, like I said, also works. And to finally close off, I wanted to mention this idea about being a generational prospect versus generational player, and I think we need to really understand how to separate that as NBA fans and media. I think looking at my notes, a generational prospect, of course, by its definition, is a prospect that comes in once in a lifetime. You look at a guy like LeBron, where when he first entered the league, a lot of his peers said that, oh, he's just a Magic Johnson, or he's just, a different type of player, maybe a different Grant Hill or anything like that. But they saw his playmaking, they saw his ability to slash, and how he was an all-around player, especially at that size. It made him different, which is why he was labeled generational. And then the most recent generational prospect is, of course, Victor Wembanyama. We've never seen somebody at that height be able to shoot, pass, play defense, absolutely everything on the floor. We have guys like Yao Ming, of course, but he wasn't as athletic or physically athletic vertically compared to Victor Wembanyama. And a lot of people like to make the Bobo comparisons, but I don't really see it. I think Bobo tends to, well, one, he's inconsistent. Now, he got minutes on the Suns and he's done pretty well, but I think, um, especially with Wembanyama's wingspan and how he operates in the pick and roll and how he can shoot from basically half court, it's still something that's we've seen shades of it. Like, you could argue Thon Maker, like, his ceiling and what he's done, basically being 7 foot and shooting and playing defense. We've seen shades of that, but the actual product is a Victor Wembanyama, which is why he's generational, because he can put it together. You have other guys that I think everybody loved that Zion was generational. It's a once in a lifetime type of player. The closest player, I think, I forgot who said it, but somebody was like, Zion's very similar to a modern day Sean Kemp, and I can see that a lot, especially the explosiveness, the motor. Now, of course, Zion has a lot of off the field, off the court issues, but I think him being 6'6" and coming into the NBA, he was probably like 240, 250. He was a different type of athlete. His ability to finish around the rim, to just outmuscle a lot of guys. You saw that Kevin Knox rip away in the summer league. Just his ability to get to the rim, and also when they ran that point Zion mode, it's we've never seen anything like it. Especially when he was in college too. I know I'm talking about the NBA aspect of it, but being a prospect and what he done in college, a lot of people could argue he's one of the best college players in history. He averaged like 22 points per game on insane efficiency. They lost, of course, but he was doing something that really hasn't been done. And in college, he was just this monster, and he was truly a man among boys. And you don't see that type of build until players get into the NBA, which is also why it's it is generational, right? Another clear one was Anthony Davis. Nobody's ever seen a player of that defensive caliber that with point guard skills. He had a growth spurts, but overall he used the same point guard skills when he was a little kid, and now him being a lot older and him being a lot more vertically dynamic and how he can move and how he can guard on the perimeter and how he can guard in the paint. Averaging almost 5 blocks a game for Kentucky, literally guarding and blocking more shots than entire teams. We've never seen a player like that. And him being at Kentucky, him just being able to score on all fields. Now, granted, he didn't average a lot of points. 14 points and 14 rebounds, 10, 11 rebounds, something like that. He was essentially a double-double machine. Of course, there were question marks, but as a generational player, you can't pass up on somebody who's defensively on a whole nother level. Something we've never seen before, especially on the college level, which is why he's generational. But how does that separate from a generational player? In my opinion, I think there are players who are generational, that are prospects generational, and then step into that generational player. Of course, that's what you want to happen. I think if a player is generational or a prospect is generational, you would of course want him to step into the NBA and become a generational player. Of course, that doesn't always happen because I think Greg Oden, obviously injuries, and then Markel Fultz. I'm not sure if they were deemed as generational, but they were definitely up there. I think when it comes to generational players, I think prime examples of players who weren't generational prospects are like the Stephen Currys of the world, the Kevin Durant, and the Russell Westbrooks. I think these guys, especially because they weren't highly touted as the number one prospect, I think you can't be a generational prospect if you're not labeled as the number one player. How are you the generational prospect if you're not going or projected to go number one, right? So these guys, we've seen modes of these players before in previous, decades and eras, like Steph Curry, like I said, KD, Russell Westbrook, but to fully put it together and to develop that pedigree into what they are now, and how Westbrook has gotten the triple doubles. Curry has, you know, elevated his game. A lot of people like to see the Ray Allens, the Kyle Korvers, the Steve Nashes, or like the elite 3 point shooters, the Reggie Millers, but that put it all together and do it on a completely different level is what makes him generational. And I think to end it off, we really need to separate this generational prospect versus generational player idea. I think, you know, generational prospects are players that come around every once in a lifetime. and we want them to become generational players, but that's not always the case. And a generational player is somebody that adds to what he already has to a completely different level. Hall of Fame type of talent. You could argue that SGA is a generational player. He's stepping into that. He's an MVP candidate. He is the MVP, and he might win Finals MVP. And he might be the first to ever do it, to win what, Finals MVP, Western Conference Finals MVP, and then the MVP. Never been done, I don't think. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say. I think that's what I wanted to get off. I like Cooper Flag. I really do. I think he's one of my favorite players to watch. However, I'm still very firm on. I don't see him being a number one option in the NBA, but I see him being a very good NBA player that has connected all of his pieces, and elevates everybody's floor. I think what I would define generational is a generational prospect is a prospect that comes in once in a lifetime, that can that's never been seen. That's never been done. We've never seen a player either of physical stature or skill based stature put together, which is why you have a different comparison between Zion and Wemby. I think, and then comparing that to a generational player is obviously in terms of a little bit of the same thing, except it's stepping into a different role and elevating themselves on a completely different stratosphere, using the skills what they have now. Might not be able to have the physical or the skill based stature, but one of them, and using that and elevating that to a completely different level. Right. My name is Cairo. Thank you for listening to my first episode of Off the Glass, where I essentially yap about absolutely anything. Please stay tuned and subscribe for more.